Thank you all for tuning in. The following is a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people.
Yes, it is I, your humble host, Bill Hatch the Third, coming to you live from the Flesh Loaf Studios of Bald Spots Productions here in the beautiful city of Malden, Missouri. Joining me from a more than acceptable safe social distance is my guest for today, Ed Cohen. Ed, how are you doing? I am just wonderful. It's a beautiful day after a stormy night. We had one of those big electrical storms that shook the frames of the house. Well, it's going to be a good one. It's going to be a good one. Yeah, it's kind of fun. I used to live in California, and we don't get thunderstorms like that out there. And it's I like to sit out and watch the rain and see the lightning bolts and all that kind of stuff. So it's crazy. Yeah, just to experience the raw power of nature like that. Okay, so usually my first question is, who are you reading? Okay. Yeah. The name sounds familiar. Okay. Wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, yeah, it is. It is. No, one of the reasons I like science fiction is because it's not in the, well, to use the phrase real world. It seems freer to explore the harder questions and or the more, or poke the bear, I guess you could say. Just watched that movie Cocaine Bear, and so that's that movie is hilarious. But yeah, so science fiction I think is freer to dive deep into these sensitive questions that people can sometimes be strangely attracted, strangely just buried in their beliefs, and and get to real problems that we have. You know. Mm-hmm. Mm, right. Yeah. 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 And yeah, it's yeah. So it's really I think it's underappreciated for that as a genre, generally speaking, especially when you're talking about people of non-American cultures and the people who are not traditionally big writers of science fiction. Um, yeah, definitely, definitely a great way to go when you're talking about reading. So, so let's see. So let's get on to onto your book. Let's see. Let's see. I wrote down the title. Um, on learning to heal. Um, yeah, or what medicine doesn't know. And medicine doesn't know a lot. Yeah, that yeah, that is true. Like math. Apparently doctors are not really good at math. Or physicians, I guess I should say, aren't really good at math. Found that out when I used to be a caregiver for a lady who died about 4 years ago of cancer, and and when she first got diagnosed, they started throwing out all these numbers about, oh, you'll, there's such and such odds of you living so many years and all that stuff. And then come to realize, because I was a business major, so I had to take statistics, and so I asked some questions and came to realize they don't know what they're talking about when it comes to statistics. And they know a lot of things, but apparently it's pretty common for them not to understand statistics. And yeah, she ended up outliving by several years their best statistical analyses. So
So, I mean, it's a point that I think most people don't understand that, but most of
yeah,
in the way that when medicine became sensible, it introduced this way of thinking that we're still quite subject to, which, like in the case of statistics, which because you were a statistics major and I was a math major, so I also know this, that when you do a statistical analysis, all of the singularity of any data point is
mm-hmm.
erased, and all you have is the bare data point. So, and then the data point is assimilated to a set, and then you can perform different kinds of mathematical operations on it in order to derive a certain kind of pattern. That's what statistics are always about, patterns. They're always about change through time. Right? That's what statistics are trying to give us a sense of. But the problem with that in relationship to medicine is it means that each of us, in our own particular form of embodiment, become, in a statistical analysis, anybody. Like the
Right,
statistics are meant to apply to anybody. And
right,
it produces what I call an anybodyization of, where it's no longer telling you about you, it's telling you about if you were just anybody, but nobody is anybody. Everybody is somebody,
right.
right? And so, in fact, I just had a discussion with a doctor yesterday about this very point, and she admitted the same thing. I mean, they know it very well pragmatically in their practice, they see it all the time. But because they've gone to what's called evidence based medicine as being the attempt to make medicine seem more reliable, but actually more scientific. And
Mm-hmm.
the reality is, medicine is not a science. It's science adjacent. It relies
Yeah.
on scientific information, but it is not a science. Like I had a hip replacement a couple of years ago, and you literally in your consent form, like the legal document, there is a
Mm-hmm.
sentence. If you ever have to sign one of these, look for it. There's a sentence that says, "I understand that medicine is not an exact science." Like you have to attest to that before they'll do anything. Which I mean, I know it wasn't exact science, but I was amazed that that was like in the legal. And the thing is that until the beginning of the 20th century, medicine was considered to be an art, right? It
Right.
was for two medicine, as we know it, was invented. It was invented in like the 5th century BCE in ancient Greece, and medicine has always relied on its capacity to know what we don't know. So, like, it invented these technologies that we continue to use. So, the major one is diagnosis. So, diagnosis, like etymologically, means by way, diagnosis of knowledge, by way of knowledge. And so, medicine says it can know something about us that we don't know, which is why we go to a doctor, right? We go to a
Mm-hmm.
doctor, we desire that they know something about us that we don't know. But the problem with that is, I mean, there's a number of problems with that. But it's a problem that when we approach a doctor as the person who's supposed to know, we give over our own power, our own resource, our own vitality to someone else in the hope that they will give us something back that will help us feel better. And it's great when they can do it. Look, I mean, my story is, I've had Crohn's disease for 51 years. I grew up in a very acute illness. I was on prednisone. I was on steroids from the time I was 13 until the time I imagine how fun that was. Um, and then when I was 23, I almost died. I had a small bowel perforation. Uh, it led to all these complications. I had bleed outs. I almost bled to death.
Wow.
Fortunately, I was allowed, I was in Stanford University Hospital when I was bleeding out, which is, if you're bleeding out, good place to be, Stanford University
Yeah.
Hospital.
Yeah.
Started having one of those out of body near death things. They got me to emergency surgery. Next thing I know, I'm in the ICU. And then something really weird happens, which is like about, to show this idea of anybodyization is a problem. It's like, because when I was in recovery, and then I was in the hospital, I had to be in the hospital for another 2 months because I was completely septic and I had to be on IV antibiotics and I had to be being weaned off of prednisone. Both of those things are very dangerous, and when they're happening at the same time, they're really bad, and then you've been really sick and they're going on. So I was there for a long time. And when I was there, I started going into trance. Now, I wasn't, now I am, but I wasn't in that day a trance type person, right? I mean, my mother was a communist. My father was a physical chemist. In my family, matter was all that mattered, right? So I was not
Okay.
aiming for any spiritual epiphany or anything. All I was doing was trying to give myself some pain management. So, I would lie on my bed with my Walkman. This was back in the day, I had my Walkman, listen to music, and I could go into the music and find this like light-filled realm, and I could take some of that light and I could put it around the places I had parts of my intestines taken out, whatever, and I just would pack it in there. It was just like to damp the pain, and then I could go into
Sure.
the space where it was really calm. Which I don't know if you've ever been in the hospital. Hospitals are not calm places. They're
No.
not places they're really good if you're acutely sick. The minute you can get out, get out. But so I
Yeah.
was, I would go into this place that was not the hospital, and it was great. Unfortunately, the nurses and the people would come into my room, and I would be like dead to the world. Which, after you just recently almost died, they don't like that so much.
No.
So, but they figured out, they turned off my Walkman. I come out of it. So, then I just kept doing it. It was like whatever. I was bored, or I was getting better. And finally, when I finally left the hospital after a couple of months, my surgeon had an exit interview with me, and he said, You were the sickest person I've operated on in 5 years who's still alive. And I don't know how you got better so quickly,
Hmm.
which blew my mind for a number of reasons. Because, like, on the one hand, I was 23, so I was kind of in denial that I had almost died. But also, like, the part where he said, I don't know how you got better.
Yeah.
And that, was a revelation first, because that was like the first time I heard a doctor say, I don't know. Second of all, like, I was like, well, why don't you understand how, like, you understand sickness, but you don't understand how I got better. And third of all, I realized, oh, I'm not just anybody, right?
Right.
Like that, like you're the person that you work with. She defied the expectations, right? She was not a statistical unit. She was a singularity with a particular life and a particular support system,
Yep.
whoever, that allowed her to continue on. And, I think that that's something that, in the world that we live in now with the medical systems that we have now, and, I always have to say, I'm not disrespecting medicine. I would be dead without it. I'm a fan. If I need it, give it to me. If you're
Mhm.
very sick, get yourself to a hospital. Do whatever. However, the blind spots of medicine around healing are enormous. They don't even know, like, since throughout the course of the 20th century, since the first decades of the 20th century, when medical training was standardized, and to be based on what what's called biochemical reductionism. That's why pre-meds, that's why they have to take calculus and physics and biochemistry and like all of the foundational sciences, even though in their daily practice, most, unless they're a researcher, that's not really relevant. But it's a kind of indoctrination
Right.
into a way of perceiving who we are as living organisms, right? And that has a lot of power. I mean, really, in the course of the 20th century, I mean, like the invention of antibiotics, all of the things that we have now, the monoclonal antibodies. I mean, they're great. Oh well, okay, they're great. They have side effects, and they have
Yeah.
problems. Like, the antibiotic thing. Like, when penicillin was introduced during the Second World War, it was a huge part of the war, of keeping people alive,
Yeah.
on the battlefield. And you know but then now what's happened is, like, antibiotics are now being fed to cows, right?
Yep.
As you know, uh, and, and to fatten them up. And the problem with all, and they're being used indiscriminately, and the problem with that is it's produced antibiotic resistant strains of bacteria, right? Which we now have no research for. So
Yeah.
we live within a system that's very complicated, has great resources, but also has a lot of problems. And that's sort of what I'm using my experiences. Like I was saying before, I've lived with Crohn's disease for 50 years, and most of that for the last 40 years, I've been really well. Like, I just went to the gastroenterologist for the first time in 25 years, and she was like, "Whoa, you've done really great." Uh, and I've done really great without any medical intervention, because there's not really that much that medicine can do for chronic illness.
Mhm.
And right now, there are so many people in the world, let's just say the U.S., because in other parts of the world, obviously, infectious diseases or lack of food, water, housing, are really much more immediate problems.
Right.
But we have a epidemic of chronic illnesses, even like, long COVID. Like,
Yeah.
there's new ones all the time. And, autoimmune illnesses, because, Crohn's, whatever.
I do have some understanding. I do live with chronic pain. My knees are bad. I've had back surgery. I've been on fire before, which I really don't recommend. Uh, and
Metaphorical way.
Yeah, no, in the literal sense.
Metaphorically, it's okay.
Metaphorically, it's okay. Literally, not so much. But but yeah, and and the normal painkillers don't do anything for me. They don't affect me at all. And so I've had to do some of what you're talking about. I don't know that I'd actually call it a trance,
Mhm.
using breathing techniques and focused meditation and those kinds of things to be able to live with the pain that I have. Um, it's my right knee's gone bone to bone. They want to replace it. They said that's about the only thing left to do is to stick a hunk of metal in your leg. But I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a little chunky, and they don't want to do it until I've lost some weight. So it's live with it. Lose weight without exercise. Well, okay, it's possible. Yeah, but yeah, the mind as can have an incredible effect on the body. That's for sure. And
Well, and that's
you
one
know,
of the things, like what you're saying. Well, I mean, pain is a really interesting and complicated phenomenon.
yeah,
It's not a purely, it cannot be purely explained in terms of bioreductionism, because it's something that we evaluate, in our minds, in relation
right,
to whatever the neural stimulation is, whatever the bone on bone is, like how we experience it is more than that. It's not like so that's why people like you have found that meditation or different ways of expanding the frame within which the pain exists, so that it's not the whole world. I mean, have been quite helpful. But I think the larger point that you're making is really important, which is and this is goes back to what I was saying about when medicine tried to become a science or to become more scientific, it wasn't a science. It's still not. But when it aspired to scientificity at the end of the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, it did this thing. It's very famous. It's the first use of blind testing. It was the invention of blind testing. It
Hmm.
was this guy Anton Mesmer. I don't know, maybe you've heard
Okay,
the name, Mesmer.
yep,
He was what we would call, well, he's like an alternative theist. Yeah. And he showed up in Paris in the 1780s. And he had this, like, okay, it's a trippy technique. I mean, like, I'm not necessarily, recommending it. But he would set up these things that he called Beckett. He had a big salon. I think of them as like the early acid tests. They were like people would come, and there was this thing in the center, the Beckett, that he set up, that he claimed channeled animal magnetism, and it had these like chains that went out, and people were. It was a very posh. It was for the aristocrats, and these very fancy, places for people to kind of lie down, and they played music. There was like this glass harmonium passage,
hmm,
and the walls were painted with like the signs of the zodiac, and he wore this like purple taffeta outfit, and he went around, and he had a little wand, and he could like channel the energy. The thing is, and people experience healing. People experience relief from pain. People experience. I mean, and it became super controversial because mostly because it was affecting the aristocrats, and the doctors, the fancy doctors at the time were jealous, and so they wrote to the king, Louis XVI, the last, the French monarch, who got his
right,
head chopped off. And he set up a royal inquiry that with all these famous scientists. It was run by Benjamin Franklin. It had guillotine, the head chopper. It
right,
had like all of these, the most famous scientists of the time. The Lavoisier, who was the inventor of modern analytic chemistry, and they started doing these tests, where tests where they would blindfold people. That's where the idea of blind testing comes from. They literally would blindfold people, and then they would either they would perform, they would do their animal magnetism stuff on them, and then people who were susceptible would say, "Oh, I feel this or that," and oftentimes not what the experimenter was trying to get them to feel, or they would tell them, "We're doing this to you," but they weren't, and then people would be feeling stuff, right? So the conclusion that they came to was really interesting, because they said, okay, this technique does produce real effects, but the effects are purely imaginary. And so what they did was they ruled out of court the idea that the imagination could be a resource for healing, right? And that is the basis for contemporary medicine. So the reason in the modern world, when they do double-blind testing now, so double-blind testing is the gold standard for evaluating the efficacy of any new technology, pharmaceutical. It's what they have to do to get the FDA to approve it, right? They need statistics, right? This is how they gather. The problem with it is and so in doing that, in order to have a benchmark, they always then have to compare it to a placebo.
Right.
Well, the reason that they compare it to a placebo is not because the placebo doesn't work. It's because the placebo does work, right? And in order for it to be shown to be an efficacious remedy, it has to work better than the placebo. So that means that medicine is built on the assumption that we know that the imagination actually can have curative effect, but we're not that interested in it because we can't sell it to you. Because guess what? You already have it. It's your resource. So we're not interested in it. So like what you were just saying, I think that that's really proof. Like you can do these techniques, these breathing techniques, these imaging techniques, and it affects your pain level, like how you experience the pain. You have been able to mobilize your imagination as a resource in your own healing process.
Yeah.
And the doctors will tell you certain things that I don't want to pile on or anything, but yeah, okay, you could maybe lose a little weight to help your knees, but I mean the physical things do need to be addressed physically.
Yeah.
If you have a tumor, have the tumor removed.
Right.
But it's not. We're not just physical, right? We are always more than that. I mean, the first chapter of my book is called, "We're More Than We Know," and that's just like my basic premise. Knowledge is a really powerful resource that, as a living species, somehow in the course of our evolution, we have developed the capacity to interact with the world in certain ways where we can notice patterns and then derive certain kinds of understanding from the way that those patterns recur. Great resource, love it. And I'm listening to me. I mean, you obviously know I'm a know-it-all. I mean, I'm not dissing knowledge by any means. But the point is that knowledge is not all that we are.
Right.
And intelligence is not knowledge. Right.
It makes me think of the Native American practice of storytelling.
Absolutely.
Healing stories.
Absolutely.
And that our minds are more than just the things that we think with. It is in control of the body. And that's interesting. It really is.
I mean, there's so many things. Story is an incredibly powerful imaginative resource. One of my great teachers, her name is Rachel Remen. Rachel is a storyteller, but she's also an MD. She was a pediatric endocrinologist at Stanford University Hospital. And she also has Crohn's disease, which I have. And so that was why when after I almost died and recovered from that, then I had like a breakdown. And I found my way to her. It was a miracle. I mean, like how I found her, but she has become. She's written 2 books. One's called Kitchen Table Wisdom. The other is called Blessings My Grandfather Gave Me. They're both international bestsellers. You can buy them at the airport, and you should. And basically, what she does is she tells stories. She went on to she started a counseling practice. She quit when the tension between being a doctor and being a patient became too great. She quit clinical medicine. She started a practice for people with chronic and life-threatening illnesses and for what's called recovering. She then also started it's a center called Commonweal, which is a comprehensive cancer care institute in Bolinas, in Northern California. And also, she was clinical professor at UCSF Medical School, where she started a course that's called The Healer's Art. That's now taught to first-year medical students, like at 100 medical schools around the country. And her premise is that storytelling is an incredible technology. The story, and Native people, indigenous forms of healing, obviously. Also, but all kinds of forms of healing that have been excluded. African American, women's healing, like the capacity of narrative, the capacity of our imagination to support us in our capacity to learn to live otherwise. Because let's face it, what is healing? Like my definition of healing is not cure, right? Healing doesn't imagine that we can erase our experiences of illness, go back to the way we were before we started suffering. Because, in case you haven't noticed in life, there is no going back, right? There's only
right.
And, so healing.
The arrow of time points in one direction.
Exactly. So healing, the way that I talk about it, it's healing represents our vital capacity as living organisms to enhance the quality of our lives in whatever conditions we live them. And obviously, some people have more resources than others. I mean, that's, and we should try to make it possible for everyone to have as many resources as they have. But whatever the circumstances are, we can increase our vitality. So healing in my world is about growing and changing, right? And, including the changing that we call dying. I mean, let's face it, everybody's going to die. We're all going to die. There's no cure to death. Hello.
Right.
Don't want to burst your bubble. And weirdly, sometimes healing can be dying. I mean, or dying can be healing. Yeah, either
way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, and in fact, I feel like that's an aspirational thing. Like, it would be amazing if for everybody, our deaths were healing. Like, that would be really incredible. Like, or, that rather than something that we feared and felt as like, a negation, it's like, oh, this is the next step in my learning. This is the next step in my growth. Like, how can I, and, the first, so, I mean, as I said before, I'm a know-it-all. So one of the most famous Platonic dialogue is the dialogue called the Phaedo, which is the death of Socrates.
Right.
And it's very, very important in the history of the West. It's the dialogue in which Plato posits the separation of body and soul, which then gets taken up as the basis of Christianity. Christianity is a kind of Platonized version of Judaism. But in that dialogue, the very end of that dialogue, so he's drank the hemlock, right? He's dying. He goes and he lies down. They're still talking, blah 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 blah, and he goes and lies down. And he puts like a wet washcloth or whatever over his eyes, lying there. And then the last thing that he does before he dies, takes off the washcloth, sits up, and he says to his protege Crito, Crito, don't forget, we owe a cock to Asclepius, meaning we need to sacrifice a rooster to the god of feeling. And that's the last words, and then he's dead. But the point being is that the origin of Western thought, the origin of Western philosophy, there is this presumption that dying can be healing, right? And but and in a way, that's what Christianity, then Christianity morphs that into like a metaphysical system where it's like dying can be healing because you're healed into another life.
Right.
That's the
To the next level, to the next
level.
realm.
But the thing is, like, well, why do we need another life? Why can't it be this life? Like healing, we are healed into this life. This life is, we're healed into life.
Right.
Death is a necessary part of life.
Yeah.
Right? So,
Yeah.
and so the point just is like healing is like the way that I like to think of it is we can desire healing if we value. Healing is a value, right? It's a process. It has a whole kind, different kinds of possibilities. But the more that we desire it and the more that we value it, the more we're capable of developing resources, of learning and growing, in all kinds of ways. Like in your example is great. So you have pain in your knees and you learn breathing technique, you learn meditation techniques. See, these are all things we expand our resource repertoire, right? In order, and if you didn't have those challenges, you might not have, the opportunity or the occasion or the impulse to do that. Right. So, that's what I'm always trying to encourage people is like, oh yeah, I mean, like all these things that we suffer from, they suck. We hate them. They're horrible. But in all of the things, everything in our life, is it possible to find within the obstacles that we run up against opportunity to become more than we were before? And, as far as I'm concerned, that's what I'm doing in this life. Like, what is this life for? Except for that.
Right.
To become more of me. And for all of us to become more of who we are. Not just in my particularity, but collectively. Because let's face it, right now, the world needs healing. Our country needs healing. Our communities need healing. But our planet needs healing. And, that's always like the example that I use, is like, the ozone layer, right? Remember, I don't know how old you are, but, in the end of the 20th century, there was this thing, there was the hole in the ozone layer.
Yeah, from the CFCs.
Yes, exactly. But then the world governments managed to be like, oh, let's ban those. Wow, amazing. And the ozone layer started to go up.
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, that is what we mean by healing.
Yeah.
Right? It's like it's a resource, it's a possibility that living organisms, possess, but our planet is a living biosphere. It has the capacity for self-repair. I mean, that self-repair might include getting rid of us because we're a toxic force. I mean, that's if we can't do better, well, okay. But hopefully, we have a stake in healing in that sense. We have personal stake, we have political stakes, we have spiritual stakes, but we have like a species stake, in learning to grow and to develop and to change and to find new ways to live that support and encourage this capacity that we already have, but we don't always know because we often outsource it to medicine. And we think, oh, I'll pay someone to heal me. It's like, no. If you heal, you do the healing. No matter how much support and encouragement other people can give you, up to and including life support. If you heal, you do the healing.
Right.
So that's one of the things I say about COVID. Like in the COVID, obviously, and that was, I don't know, it drives me nuts sometimes. We have this huge event that has such global impact, right? That has such obvious things that we can learn from, and yet we don't, right?
Right.
And one of the things, I mean, like especially at the beginning of the COVID, like a couple of things like immediately struck me. One was like, one of the things that COVID shows us clearly, and any kind of infectious disease will show you this, is that biologically speaking, individualism is counterfactual. We are always already connected to each other.
Yeah.
And the way that you know that, well, first of all, the word contagion means touching together. Absolutely. But the way that you knew that was like right at the beginning. You remember when they told us not to touch each other? And it was like, whoa. It became really visceral how much we touch each other.
Yeah.
It's like by not being able to do it, how much we do it became an issue, right? And similarly, in terms of like, in the beginning when there weren't the antiretrovirals and they didn't really know much about, what to do, when they came up with proning, they turned people over in the hospital. And people would be put on life support, and obviously some people died. A lot of people died.
Yeah.
Some of them from this thing called cytokine. But some people didn't die. Some people went to the ICU, somehow got better, got out, and are still alive.
Yeah.
Those people, they received a lot of support, but the healing that happened, they did. It's their body. The tissues regenerate. Whenever we heal, we're the ones who do the healing. But we have lost the sense that this is our vital reason, right? We now give that over to pharmaceutical companies, to hospitals, to doctors, and we hope, we pray, we cross our fingers, that they can do something for us, and sometimes, and a lot of times they can. I'm here. I'm happy to be. I'm so happy to be alive. But we can also do something for ourselves. And when I say we, I don't mean us individually, although that's true. But we in our communities, we can build network of healing. And
it's just like what you said. You get support from, whether it's from medicine or from other people. You have your community that supports you.
Exactly.
But the healing is yourself, is you yourself.
Exactly. Well, like you were saying about the woman that you worked with, like you were a support, like you were part of the healing network.
Yeah.
Right? You weren't a doctor, but you were probably more important to her on a daily basis than whatever her doctors could do for her. And chemo was doing one thing or whatever treatments they were giving her, but you were actually taking care. And that's the thing. I mean, obviously when I'm talking, I'm saying doctors, but obviously like in medicine, there are lots of different kinds of practitioners, and nurses know. So that's the thing. Nurses know a lot of what I'm saying, and obviously nursing is highly gendered, it's highly racialized, physicians, assistants, all the different PT, all of these things, there's many kinds of adjunctive parts of the medical apparatus that are, less entranced, by the idea of biomedical reduction. But nonetheless, the entire system and the payment process that organizes the system is literally invested. Like it's invested financially, it's invested psychologically, it's invested epistemologically, it's invested in this particular assumption that medicine knows something about it that we don't know. And, and that at a certain level, that's not untrue. But as I said before, we're more than we know. Right? We're more than medicine knows. We're more than, in a certain sense, we can know. Like, there is the unknowable. That's where creativity comes from.
Yeah. Wow. Well, on that note, let's talk about let's talk about where can people find on Learning to Heal, or what medicine doesn't know. Where's the best place to find it?
So if you're interested in the work I do, I actually, in addition to being a know-it-all and being a professor. I have a healing practice or a counseling practice that's called Healing Counsel,
Healing Counsel.
where I work Healing Counsel, where I work with people with chronic and life-threatening illnesses, or anybody who's interested in healing. And so my website is just healingcounsel.com.
Healingcounsel.com.
And if you go on there, you find out more about what I do and who I am. And there you can buy my book on learning to heal, or what medicine doesn't know, through my website. But it's widely available. It's on Amazon. It's a trade book. It might be in your local bookstore, anywhere you want to buy books. But if you feel like it, check out my website. There's some lovely pictures of my garden.
I'll put the link in the description so people can find it easily. And for sure. And on learning to heal, or what medicine doesn't know, and then healingcounsel.com. And my guest has been Ed Cohen. Thank you so much, Professor Ed. Yes. An occupational hazard. Well, better than calling you Mr. Ed. But yeah, thank you so much for being on the program. And hopefully people have learned some stuff and have some great takeaways from the show today. I know I do.
Awesome.
And I always ask my guests, do you have any parting words for the nice people?
You're more than you know. Go and find out who you are.
That is that seems to be the purpose of life, to find out who you are. So thank you all of our watchers and listeners. Remember to be safe out there, wash your hands, and stay tuned for the ending credits.
Thank you all for tuning in. This has been a presentation of Bald Spots Productions. I'd like to thank our producer, my beloved mother, Eileen Hatch.
I, of course, am your humble host.
I'd like to thank my special guest for today, Ed Cohen.
Support the show if you feel so led over on patreon.com. We're known as Bald Spots Pro. Don't you dare miss YWL Online. You can find us on Facebook, YouTube, and wherever fine podcasts are offered.
Be sure to tune in next time when my special guest will be Irene Gabelnick. Be sure to like, comment, and share. Subscribe, follow, whatever it is you've got to do to kick that algorithm into gear and help us reach more people.
If you or someone you know needs support now, call or text 988 or chat 988lifeline.org. That is the suicide and crisis lifeline here in the United States.